The Voting Rights Act was heard at the Supreme Court today, same day that a full-sized statue of Rosa Parks was unveiled. We are hearing at the Supreme Court whether we should get rid of provisions from the Voting Rights Act altogether. Oral arguments were heard today. This is, of course, an act that is really was put in place really to address. Is it unfair to say the racism when it came to voting rights, particularly in the South of this country?
That seems to be it.
Am I out of line if I say that, Natan?
No, there was, since the Reconstruction period, the South had basically disenfranchised all black people. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands to millions of black people in the South, and only hundreds could vote. The Voting Rights Act essentially brought black people into the voting world in the South.
So we already know that the argument being made is basically that things have changed so much that we no longer need this oversight on elections. Now, of course, what this would open up the door to would be more and more acute versions of the types of legislation we've been seeing, which could well lead in the future to voter fraud, really election fraud and voter suppression. The Supreme Court has already, I don't want to say they've prejudged, but we've seen skepticism from the Supreme Court about the need for the Voting Rights Act. Back in 2009, the justices heard a similar challenge where Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, "It is not adequate justification to retain the preclearance requirements of the law," and they did sidestep the constitutionality of this law back in 2009. Now, what have we heard, Natan, about how the oral arguments went today?
Well, I think based on what we heard this morning, I didn't hear them, but I saw some comments that the conservatives, quote-unquote conservatives, were making. And it seems like they're going to strike down Section 5, the preclearance requirement for the covered jurisdictions, mostly in the South. And it seems like basically they think that it's no longer valid to single them out when really they are not any worse, according to them, than many other parts of the country that aren't covered, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, et cetera. So there's that, but there's also a separate issue here, which is who has the power to make this claim. In other words, the 15th Amendment says that the Congress has the power to defend voting rights with the intention of preventing voter disenfranchisement for black people. So if they get involved here, this would be an act of severe judicial activism. They're basically saying Congress reauthorizing this act in 2006 is not valid. Congress doesn't have the authority to do this.
Right, and that's really the question I was thinking as I read this, Lewis. Would this even be heard by the Supreme Court if it weren't for having right-wing activist judges on the court right now?
I really doubt it. I mean, it seems like the overall goal of this is to allow for more voter fraud or voter suppression, rather.
In addition to gerrymandering, in other words, we're now also going to repeal parts of the Voting Rights Act, which would open up the door to even more manipulation of how this country votes.
Most likely, yeah.
There's one more thing I think we can say about this, which is what would happen if they do strike it down, which is what I think they're going to do. Well, theoretically, Congress could pass the same law and say it applies to every state. But that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because the law itself, Section 5, was already very controversial. It was an overreach of federal power designed to stop some very horrible things that were happening at the time. So that's not going to happen. So the net result, unfortunately, is going to be, as we saw in this last election cycle, the Department of Justice was able to stop voter ID laws from going into effect in the covered jurisdictions. Those things will not be able to be prevented.
That's exactly right, and that's dangerous.
It's chaos when you think about how different every state is when it comes to elections and
so
voting.
You're against states' rights?
Well, when it comes to certain things, I think, the federal government needs, in some cases, to make sure things are the same across the board.